Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I'd like to address you in regards to the current situation. We are in the final countdown of the end of this current administration for Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America. And soon will be the inauguration of a new president. And the incoming administration has made some bold promises in regards to what they intend to accomplish. But time alone will tell whether they are capable of producing real results that fulfill the promises that they made to the American people on the campaign trail and serve for the needs of now, for the best interests of America as a nation, and for all Americans, and hopefully with consideration of the best interest of the world as well. I believe that there is a need now more than ever for good people of the world to take the extended period of time of the next 4 years with the hopeful assumption that we will have another presidential election and uphold the American democracy at the end of this presidential term. We have responsibilities as the good people of the world to not focus on fighting the systems that the incoming administration intends to erect, but rather to surpass them. It's a long-standing belief that I have in terms of what I think the proper intended use of the democratic system of government is supposed to take on in responsibility, and that's to not combat, to defeat competing political ideologies or forms of government, but rather to surpass them. And in America, our system of government was intended from the original spirit of intent of our founding through the Declaration of Independence on through the formation of all documents that forged the foundry of citizenship around our Constitution. The government itself was established calling forth from the citizenry themselves those who are capable and elevate them into great leaders and to allow them to be responsible stewards. And the hope was that these politicians would be credible and lovable and respectable and uphold an unparalleled integrity because they represented the institution of the government itself. And I believe that American democracy is really in a questionable place right now. because of the fact that there are quite a few deplorables that are in government that have come from every spectrum of the political ideological field. I'm not one to say it's the political left or the political right, but we need to focus on what is right in terms of what's just, fair, reasonable, and right. And when you try to hold people to that foil in their actions and their behaviors and their rhetoric, it's quite often you see them failing to just meet the simple, demands of basic human decency, let alone the integrities of good humanity. And they fall short oftentimes of being able to have the internal capacity to be a true partner in governance, which should be the representative on behalf of the individual working in partnership together to assure that we are doing, right by ourselves and our fellow citizens to perfect this, art of living together, which is, what civilization is. At least that's how I have come to like to define it and delineate it. But over time, government has become less about being, filled with politicians that are examples in service, who live inspiring careers of helping America to, restore integrities and reclaim our dignities, and to reconfirm our deeply held beliefs, and to assert our values, and to hold ourselves accountable to that with measure of, just, right, reasonable, and fair laws that are not impositions or oppressions, but rather varying limitations on those things to which would infringe upon the necessary space we have to uphold of common grounds, common decencies, common respects, which I have come to in my philosophical interpretation of political science, and the philosophy of that is to have the sense of citizenship is this interrelationship with one another, and we have to have safe spaces in between so that we can each be independent but have the capacity to fit together as a cohesive whole. And that law is supposed to be the capacity for us to coalesce around our ideas around this core concept of what it means to be American, what it means to be America, our identity, or our shared, sense of who we are, where we are, and when we are in time, befit the times. And that laws are supposed to help us to orient with one another, and they need to be based off of things that are easy to understand, that are reasonable, and are easy to agree with. They're very agreeable, and they have to meet this standard that I believe in of mutualities. So you have to have that space of, we all belong in this together, and then the allowance for us to all fit into that space together, and enough separation between us so that we don't create this unnecessary friction, But then recognize when we do rub each other the wrong way, then we assert a form of law that gives us a little bit more separation, a little bit more space to be able to involve ourselves with each other as, citizens living in a sense of domestic order with one another. And I think that the most consequential leaders of American history have always been those who have carved out space for human dignity and human right and, self-determination and valued things that matter, like the family unit, but not in a sense of defining that as only being like a man and a woman and, a kid and a pet or something, but like the family unit, like however people bond with one another and unify with each other, those bonds that tie, those ties that bond, right, rather, and in the most natural sense, and for society to honor that, respect it, give it, a legitimacy, and honor it, because that right there is the natural path to peaceful accord, is to respect that family unit. That's something that I once heard in conversation where somebody referenced a family as being the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I liked that because it matched in with my, internally consistently matched in with my belief that the family unit itself is this a self-assembling, self-contained, self-identified, self-perpetuated, self-determined, existing essence of this coming together. And sometimes it's based off of blood, and sometimes it's based off of just the internal bonds that you create with people through relationship developments. And so these great leaders that we used to have in America, they help to embolden the opportunities for the present, for us to have the existence of having like LGBTQ rights and civil rights, and to have discrimination against age or sex or race, and these sorts of things are no longer allowed. We have said that America does not stand for those sorts of things happening in America, and when they do, we have corrective mechanisms to make sure that we are corrected back into alignment with what is just, fair, reasonable, and right, which says that we don't discriminate in these ways and whatnot, and we allow a safe space for people to be as they are and how they choose to show up. And so the people who have done the good work in the past as leaders in government, in organizations, in communities, even in their own homes and their families, they embolden the present with this opportunity to have safe space for us to have an America that is more tolerant and accepting. But many of those things that we worked really hard to help us to create an edge by which we can align ourselves with, and by which we can hold ourselves to account, and by which we can distinguish, delineate, and define the parameters by which law can be applied, are getting eroded away. This is most apparent in the dissolvement of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which I understand that sort of organized establishment of safe space for us to create a collective involvement with one another that makes sure that nobody gets left behind based off of, internalized biases of decision makers who have, long-standingly been put into positions of power and decision making and have long used that biases to keep individuals out of those spaces so they themselves don't gain power to make decisions, to make sure there's more space for other like-minded individuals to enter in. Holding that, rigid conformity to a very small subset where most people in our government are made out of, white males that are in the higher income brackets. And so diversity, equity, inclusion was supposed to remove that type of, inherent corruption from all of the establishments that are we depend upon in society to help people to involve themselves and to advance themselves into positions of power and authority so that they can bring along with them all of those people to which they love, care for, support, are concerned about, are considerate of, are aware of, who understand the types of stories and experiences they had because either they lived it themselves or they're just so compassionate enough that they have taken it upon themselves to be in the know of the unique experience of those people and cared enough to want to bring them along into a pathway, a channel by which they can be risen from, the confines of limitations of lacks of opportunity into a pathway of, blazing a trail of opportunity for all those people to come through on. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion was really about doing that. And yeah, there are aspects along the way where, it was used inappropriately because, everything has a proper intended use. But if there's a way to, make something work, there's a way to make it do other things as well. So if you make something, it has a way to be used in other directions. So if there are bad actors with nefarious intent, they could use that in a negative way. But that type of corruption was the same type of corruption they were trying to correct for by creating DEI. So the problem isn't to, eradicate those systems or to not apply ourselves to it anymore or to devalue them, but rather to recognize the inherent weaknesses of that system and reinforce them with positive self-correcting mechanisms that weed out the corruption that could spawn, and then constantly keep it transparent and accountable to whatever that, strong affirmative edge of law and standards of integrity that we establish together. But because these programs, unfortunately, were mostly just optional and not set into, a framework of like really well-defined law, many people are dissolving those programs or disadvantaging them or, trying to devalue them. And so we're losing a lot of the pathways by which we were giving people opportunities to, overcome the barriers that are naturally imposed in a biased, saturated society and give them a chance to make something of themselves out of this opportunity that we've created for them. So, so this isn't affecting, blue collar and white collar jobs. It's affecting, positions in government. It's affecting, schools. It's affecting, people who will end up becoming the high-end professionals. This is going to affect the healthcare system in terms of representation in those areas. And in the fact that the representation is missing in all those areas, all we're doing is creating blind spots. And when you have these blind spots, it's not just like you don't see it, you don't hear it, And so it's not there. It's rather, it's there, but you're ignoring it. And so all of the problems that can manifest because of your lack of awareness, your intentional ignorance, because you've intentionally blinded yourself to this. There's going to be a lot of unintended consequences that are going to affect people more than those who would have gotten the advantage in that way. Everybody's going to be put at a disadvantage that we have not yet seen the ramifications of, but they're coming. It's not like they're not going to happen. And we know that they're coming because of what it was before we had those programs, and why we chose for ourselves back then to establish them, and the great gains in society that we've made along the way. We're gonna miss it when it's gone, and we're already starting to see those impacts. But the biggest argument against it that I've heard has been mostly about wanting to make sure that we have qualified individuals. And at the baseline fundamental, I agree, but that's why we need to make sure that we allow more people, more diverse amount of people get to the point where they are very well versed and they are, exceptionally well at these things, and that they're advanced based off of real genuine merits. But the problem is, a lot of these people who are killing off DEI programs are the ones who have either advantaged or taken advantage or benefited indirectly or directly from those programs themselves. But then they want to cut off that opportunity for other people. And whether or not they were part of, the accounted diversity, but a lot of them are CEOs to companies who have benefited from people in those programs coming in and doing good work for their companies. And many of these people, who are oftentimes significantly privileged individuals, especially in terms of they don't have to rely on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in order to get opportunities, because they're white and they're male and they're from a certain economic class, so they have a lot more opportunities just automatically built in, inherent in the system. So they don't know what it's like. They don't know what it's like to not have those opportunities. Yet they're justifying themselves, saying that we need to take away those opportunities because everything needs to be based off of merit. Well, the actuality of what merit really is, it's not, things merciless, moralist, manipulative, mean, or even monetary. These are not merits. In society, when we think about merit, it is something that does good for the collective good. It brings about good humanity. It brings about good outcomes. And it's good because it makes you feel right, good. It makes other people feel right and feel good. That when you look at it just on the merits, in terms of if you just wrote it out on a piece of paper and looked at it without understanding, any of the, color or race or, age or sex or anything like that, you just look at it on those base things, it would say, okay, that shows exceptional value, And so, merit is based off of, generating things of value that are good outcomes, and that they don't bring with them the inherent ties to things that are moralist, merciless, manipulative, mean, or even monetary, especially because things have gotten so out of hand in society that people care more about money than they care about making a difference in the world. They care more about money than they care about people, which, not to devalue this conversation about DEI, because obviously it's important, and I really wish that the incoming administration cared enough to preserve the integrities of that rather than intentionally dismantling it. I move on to the next thing that I think that the incoming administration's missing the point of the exercise, which is in regards to the wildfires that are happening in California that has devastated lives there. First of all, this isn't the first rodeo that we've had with this in America. We have wildfires every year. They get increasingly worse and more destructive, and it just happens to get a little bit more attention because where it happens to be is where a lot of famous people live and rich people live, and so there's a lot of drama and craze that comes with that. So there's a lot of clickbait material to sell in the media, media profiting off of the suffering, human suffering, and taking advantage of the fact that it's naturally going to be amplified because these people are famous. And so to me, it's just like, how unfortunate that they're exploiting these people in their hour of need. But the point of the matter is that we are not doing what is necessary to prepare ourselves as a civilization to withstand natural disasters, whether they are generated from a man-made cause like sparking a fire, or they're generated from a man-made cause in terms of the human contribution to the warming of the globe, global warming, and the ramifications and implications of climate change. When we look at it, we understand that these events are happening. We just had devastating hurricanes, and so many people there lost lives, and they lost their livelihoods, and they lost their homes, and they lost all their possessions, and it's gone in a second. And the same thing's happening with these fires, and the point is that we are not doing what we need to do to be a prepared people, to steward ourselves, civilization, human societies, communities, neighborhoods, homes. We're not stewarding those things to navigate ourselves through the changing times ahead, where temperatures are going to increase. We're going to see more extreme weather events, and more lives are going to be lost, more property is going to be lost. And so we need to take that seriously, and we need to start stewarding ourselves and steering ourselves, navigating through, these unpredictable uncertainties that are definitely going to happen. You know what I'm saying? We have to recognize that, there's no way to accurately predict what's going to happen, but we can be intelligent about the variables in a scenario universe, and we can steward ourselves through that and prepare. And the incoming administration doesn't care about setting us on a trajectory for long-term stewardship to reduce the human impact on the planet, so that we reduce our contribution to the changing climate, and to get us back into alignment with planetary boundaries, where we are in the safe operating space of planet Earth, where we can secure the habitability and livability of our planet. And then taking the not so distant future plans to build out for ourselves to slowly phase out human dependency on oil on a mass consumer basis, and repurpose it in ways that make it a more long enduring use system, but has less of an overall impact on the changing of the climate for its utility, by adopting new renewable systems of energy, and then reimagining, how we use energy, is so that we can be on a sustainable course of comfortable conservation, and then taking the more nearer term plans, in terms of saying we have to understand we're going to have more of these weather events. They're likely to happen in these areas. We need to establish preparedness schemas in projects and plans to go and build reinforcements to help people to either get out of the path of harm's way, to divert the likelihood of harm happening, reduce the chances of things going wrong, and to mitigate the risk as much as possible, and to become aware of it, and then to prepare people individually so that they can be prepared themselves to respond, and then get everybody in terms of understanding what you have to do in case of an emergency, and then get more people that are volunteering and willing to respond in those times of need, and to mobilize an entire network across the entire nation, and yes, in fact, the world, to be able to respond when these sorts of things happen, so that we can recoup as much as we can and re-establish integrity as fast as possible. And then in the immediate now, when I look at what's happening with the fires, especially because I have been through wildfires before, I have friends who are wildland firefighters. I have studied with individuals who were actually studying to become professional wildland firefighters, and not just in the sense of being able to go fight the fires, but understand the Bureau of Land Management to help to, control for fires before fires happen, sort of thing. And because I live in an area that has a prone to wildfires, it was very important for me to understand the risks so I can learn how there might be opportunities for mitigations, and to establish preparedness, because especially for the fact of knowing what I could do in case of, set my mind at ease every time I've had to face that uncertainty and that potential issue, evacuation orders and things like that, seeing the flames across from you, and where do you go, what do you do, how to protect yourself and your animals and your neighbors, and understanding how fire moves in certain types of terrain and stuff, so you know which way you have to go if you have to escape safe as possible, these sorts of things. And so understanding that, looking at it in terms of we're very ill-equipped to handle these sorts of things. We don't have enough people that are readily trained and capable to safely go and fight these fires. We don't have enough resources in terms of equipment. In many areas where it's wild land areas, we don't have appropriate roadways for access points. A lot of that has to do with, especially in the state where I'm from, we banned logging a long time ago in order to conserve a certain type of animal species, which is totally necessary, but at the same time didn't account for the fact that you need to still do some logging to be able to keep those pathways open for the roads to be maintained by those companies, so that when a fire breaks out, you have a road system to get into, to access, so that you can fight the fire meet the fire where it's at, instead of wait till it comes to you. Because at that point in time, it's gained so much intensity, so much has been lost in all of that distance and whatnot, and so there's all these things that we ought to be doing, but we have not been doing, because we've instead been doing what we want, which is ignoring the fact that this is a real problem that we have to face, and that we're going to keep facing it over and over again. And while this time it may be, in California and in the rich neighborhoods, and everybody's getting all of the airtime and care about the story, because of those who are impacted are, people that are, famous enough that people are like, oh, we know who that is, and then you care because you know who it is, you care what happens to them, and then not considering all of those people that are not famous, that you don't know, that have also been impacted by this too, who don't have the money to go stay in super expensive hotels, and to just turn around and buy more possessions that have been lost. They literally lost everything, and they have nowhere to go. And I don't think we should really give a lot of legitimacy to the standing government officials' behaviors in terms of how they've chosen to respond to this. But the ineptness of their capacity to respond effectively to the impending and then now the, all-consuming fire has left a lot to be desired in terms of what shoulda, woulda, coulda happened, but it didn't. So who cares? We should care, and we should make a difference so this doesn't happen again. But then I see the, head of the incoming administration, rather than, really giving us solutions to say, you know what, this is a thing, this is what's happening, this is what we're going to do and execute as a plan to make sure that, this sort of thing never happens again. Instead, he passes blame and points fingers and gets mad and, and instead of going and talking to those individuals and going to the scene and discussing with the government officials on the ground and the people with boots on the ground to see where are the hitches, where are the shortcomings, what sort of resources do they not have that they needed, what might we do to be able to help to solve for the problem, like that they ran out of water and they weren't able to protect the homes, these sorts of things. What coulda, woulda, shoulda happened, and how can we build out resiliency plans to prevent this in the future? And then how can we get those people back on track to get back to a sense of normalcy in their life, to help to restore their lives back to make them whole again? And he doesn't care to go have those conversations. He doesn't care to work with that local government. Instead, he likes the power of saying, I'm the one that has the microphone, so you have to listen to me, and I'm choosing to talk down about these people and all the mistakes that they've made, and then offer no solutions to, say, well, you should have done it this way. This would be the better model to, implement next time. Because that's not the type of person he is. That's not the type of leader he is. And it's because he likes bread and circuses, not, real life solutions. So, and I'm not trying to talk him down as if he's an irredeemable person, because I do believe in the redemption of everybody. I do believe if he talked to the right person that he would see the error of his ways and that he would have the potential within him to improve and do good things as a leader of America to help to restore integrities. But he surrounds himself with yes men and enablers and those people who will glorify him and praise him and not push back and to not give him, intelligent insights. They rather just give him, apologies, apologize. They're very apologetic to him, and then they give him, excuses and, scapegoats when he needs them, and these sorts of things. I don't think that those who he's selected for his administration are incapable people. They've obviously succeeded in the places that they have succeeded. And again, I don't think that they're not, I don't think they're irredeemable people. But I do think that so long as them and Trump are reinforcing each other's paradigm in which they only have to care about themselves and those that matter to them, that we will continue to see the perpetuation of outcomes in America that align with them trying to make America great, and therefore America will not be doing good. And we will fail to do good. And I'm not okay with that outcome, which is, why I really believe this time period is an inflection point for America. And I want to really role model a different way for America to align themselves and hopefully draw away from the Trumpian mentality and paradigm that they're creating, and pull people back into a paradigm that is, mutually beneficial for everybody, that cares about human dignity and honesty and decency, these sorts of things. A paradigm in which the world is better off for it, and the world is made a safer place, and that, everyone can do well, and everybody is well. That's why I want to create a welfaring stewardship paradigm, and to build along that continuum, and invite as many people as possible into that, with the intention for everybody to belong, and create the safe space for everybody to belong, and then eventually make that, system so wonderful that it makes the system of the Trumpianism obsolete. And not in a sense of like I'm fighting it and I'm trying to destroy it or battle it, but rather common sense for people will recognize that this really is a much better way. And then eventually everybody from that paradigm can be invited over with welcome into this new paradigm, because I want them to be there too. And I want to do so in such a way that we can really break down the barriers that have been created by the MAGA cult and by those who are against the MAGA cult. These barriers and these walls have been created in society that keep us from being able to unite for a common purpose, a common goal, common identity. I want America to remember who we are, and that we recognize what we're doing here together, and to make America a place that's desirable to live in, that's safe to live in, that's peaceful to live in. And so I know there's many different things that this administration is going to take on to do in purpose. What I'm really trying to set myself up for with intentions, I rather say, is to be a beautiful model of contrast to that. And where I'm at in my present state, I'm not able to affect change because I haven't tried to do so directly. But now I'm ready to do that. I kind of see this again as an inflection point, but also as a golden opportunity to be able to make this sorts of change. And so part of the reason why I have committed myself to sharing these insights here for whoever is listening and tuning in, right, is to establish my voice and my identity so people can come to trust me. I want them to be able to hear me speak my truth with my voice, and to understand where I'm coming from, and to hear me sometimes kind of like a parrot repeating itself, to constantly reinforce and reiterate those values that I really hold dear in terms of how I perspective the world, how I proprio position myself in the world in terms of like how I angle out in the universe and separate it in degrees and set my intentions and live out through the truest truth that I know, and continuously develop in my process, because I think it's really important that we have people that are leaders are intentionally self-developing constantly. Because if you're in the right mind place and your heart's in the right place and you have the best intentions for all parties involved, and you get everybody working together towards one common purpose, anything is possible. I really believe in the human potential of everybody. I believe that human ingenuity is the most abundant resource, and we all have it. We just have to tap into it. And I see the potential in everybody, and I know how to draw out that potential from people put to a proper and intended use of establishing welfaring stewardship in the world. And that's really what I'm all about, is getting to a place where I can start building out those things that people can start aligning with, and and it will become this, gravitational force by which people are naturally attracted to, because it's aligned and it's attuned with something that resonates on a really visceral human level of like, that's good, that feels good, that's right, that's just, that's reasonable, that's fair. And I want it just to be like a simple knowing to people, like, I get it, that's it, man, and I don't want it to be about like, you got it, sort of thing. I'm not looking for, things to be coalesced around me. I want things to be built around the concept of welfaring stewardship, and for everybody to involve in that in a very individuated, independent, humanistic way, and in an authentic way. So that's a lot of the reason why my videos are not me sitting in front of a camera talking, because I don't want people to be distracted by my presence. I would really just like my voice to carry the weight of sound and intention and meaning and purposefulness, so that there can be a point in time where my voice kind of just like fades into the background, the soundtrack background, and what replaces it is your own, thoughts and feelings and ideas and things like that are just in similar fashion, in recognition of the value that's there, that core human value that's there, and that you just carry that forward yourself. And so while I do some videos with me in the actual screen, my doing that sometimes and then doing this other times, I just think it works better, because I don't want to overstimulate the senses. I want people to not necessarily hear the words that I'm saying, but to grasp the more than words that I'm speaking of. And I really, hope I can find those type of people that are interested in that. Like, who wants to just sit and watch a black screen and listen to noise and sound and, somebody speaking. But I'm hoping it's those who are really looking for good ideas and that are interested in considering this that I'm presenting, and taking it with that grain of salt, so they can build some steam and we can get this motor revving, to be able to bring forth the progress, move along that track of progress in humanity. So I have spent enough time for myself, mostly, to understand my contrast to the incoming administration. I do not belong in their world. I choose not to belong in their world, and I do not belong in their world. I choose for the fact that, who you surround yourself with matters. And I don't want to pick up on their bad habits, and I don't want to align with them, because it is a genuine friction within my soul print values to align with them. Now, I do take them into consideration. I literally empathize with them, and even still sympathize with them, which is, compassionately sympathize with them. I want to act when I see them suffering, because I want to lessen human suffering and human struggle. And I really want to inspire them to be better people, self-develop, become their best version, these sorts of things, especially to avoid the karmatic retribution of time, because it will consequence against everybody, especially if those are people in power that are going to be facing those consequences, because their consequences affect everybody consequentially. But for the fact that when I empathetically consider their perspectives and their perceptions and their proposition in terms of like where they are, when they are, and how they are showing up in the world, and their propositions to the world, and I look at all those things and I put myself in their place, their where, when event, so that I can understand who they are. I do that so that I can understand, what it is that is common and what it is that is, that point of contention, so that I can build out solutions that can, solve for that. And I really try, because it's important for me to understand, because I believe fundamentally the only thing that is standing in between two conflicting points, whether it's, a point of contention between people who have differing ideologies, or it's a point of contention in terms of, two nations warring with each other, it's a misunderstanding, and that there is a way to come into understanding with people. And I very much care and concern myself with figuring out the little puzzle of establishing understanding and mutual understanding. And so I consider those things. But when I do that, I have to put myself out completely from myself, because they really do rub me the wrong way. And I become offended, and my righteous anger boils up, and I become so overwhelmed with pity and disappointment for them. And I will oftentimes cry, because I feel so much pity for them, knowing how little they are conscious of, how ignorant they are in terms of certain things that really should be common to all of us if we're going to be, good humanity. So I try to distill that down. I try to figure it out. I really, really do want to comprehend the human element existing in all of us, and model capacities for us to enter into a position of mutual understandings with one another, so we can resolve conflict, which I think is ultimately what, a government person in government is supposed to do, especially, the president is supposed to be somebody who helps create solutions to conflicts, conflict resolution for a beautiful revolution, right? But unfortunately, the incoming administration, the incoming president, is a person who likes conflict. He feeds off of it, and he benefits from it, in terms of gaining power and money and influence, and what he deems as prestige, and what, people have perverted the concept of merit and called it merit. But those things aren't, because again, moralists, merciless, these things aren't meritorious. So, but understanding that, and wanting to not limit the human experience of others into a conformity of expectations that I hold, and endear, in terms of how I want to align my soul with, but understanding there are certain things of just like, we ought not to do those sorts of things. And I really believe, like, freedom is, it's not freedom to do as we want, but rather to do as we ought. And that's really what law is supposed to be about, is to help us understand what we ought to be doing in, right time, right place, right intentions, these sorts of things. So I consider all these things, and I bring it into the framework of the work that I'm doing and building out for these systems and these organizations, and these innovations, and intentional infrastructure, project proposals, innovative approaches and solutions to, troubling situations and circumstances and crises, whether they are, in terms like human relationships conflicting with each other, or crises in terms of dealing with, emergency situations like these fires. So I really feel like, my process in talking about it and showing it out in terms of, communicating these ideas and the potential I see and the capacity that I'm building out for, is hopefully to be able to instill some confidence in other people, and attract my tribe, those sort of like-minded individuals that are interested in building out together, the right types of technologies and innovations, which in my opinion are different things, infrastructures, educations, and network building and coalition building and these sorts of things, so that we can start affecting change together. As long as I'm, speaking about it, hopefully it'll draw attention in. I want to end the concept because of, the big inspiration for talking was, of course, about considering government, and the incoming administration. And so I really wanted to emphasize one of the key core concepts of what I think America really needs in order to restore integrities back to where we, original spirit of intent. And that is to establish a fourth branch of government. So right now we have the executive, and we have the legislative, and we have the judicial. And this separation of powers is supposed to make sure that no one branch has too much power concentrated in it, so that the capacity to affect change is supposed to have a check and balance system in it. This is to make sure that, it's supposed to be anti-corruption. It's supposed to be, making sure that there's a path to redress grievances and a means for people to dissent. And in order to make sure that, a single ideological, narrative is not capable to disintegrate the domestic order, hijack America and remake it in the image of somebody else, which I really believe that the incoming administration's trying to do, magify and Trumpianism and magify everything and instill this Trumpianism mentality. Again, not saying anybody who's Trumpian or MAGA are irredeemable in their qualities. These are still good people. I know people and love people who are of both of those, conformities, but I can't personally align with them in so many degrees of closeness because of the fact that their alignments are direct friction against my soul print values that say we ought not to treat each other in that way, and we ought not to be doing those sorts of things to the planet, and we ought not to be building out a society that allows for that type of bad behavior and things like that. So but I believe we should amend the Constitution to allow for a fourth branch of government that establishes a civics branch of government that gives the asserted definite rights to the people. Because the, Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, are not enough to protect the freedoms and liberties, rights of people, or to establish their responsibilities either. And the government has taken upon themselves to take more power than what they actually have. They're taking power away from the people without their consent. And they're only supposed to have the power that has been reserved, especially for the executive branch and for the states. The rest of that is supposed to fall to the people, and they have been busy concentrating that power and taking it away from the people, disempowering them, disadvantaging them, and making them dependent on the government. And then, fighting between making big government, so it's, too big to fail, even though it's making the state itself fail, or too small that it's overly concentrated in the hands of a few that then get hijacked by ideological, paradigms and fail to see the blind spots of their ignorance where they actually are causing more harm and leaving whole populations of people by the side of the road and disadvantaging an extreme amount of the population. So we need to have another branch of government that actually distinguishes, takes back those rights for the people. And it begins with personal dominion and self-sovereign autonomous personhood to make sure that the people have rights to their own lives, their own bodies, their own homes, their own way of life, their own identities, these sorts of things. That the government doesn't have the right to step in and intervene on the behalf of the person in regards to very personal matters, especially because the government's not the one that has to live in the outcome consequences of those decisions. And that those decisions really don't affect the overall general, unity with one another in a sense where it would cause us to disintegrate and to not have domestic order. Many of the things that the government tries to do by taking away a person's rights and saying that the government has the right to intervene on your behalf are things that are very personal to individuals, it's a very independent thing, and the government justifies, taking away that person's rights, people's rights, because some, subset of the population says it's offensive to their religious beliefs or something like that. Particularly in terms of like abortion, which is like, it's perfectly fine for people to believe in pro-life and to want to be able to, preserve the life of babies and of mothers and to want to promote the development of families and all of these things is perfectly fine, especially if how you interpret your religion suggests that you believe that we need to make sure that from conception, life is preserved. But just because that is your interpretation and belief, and it's wholly based off of a religious ideology and does not have a actually strong supportive evidence in terms of fact-based scientific, intelligence, that you don't have, you have a moral standing, but you don't have an ethical standing by which to say that you can justify taking away the rights of somebody to choose for themselves. Perfectly fine for you to socially sanction and to help to promote people to make the decisions that you would hope that they would make, but there is no legal basis by which you can justify the government taking away a person's right to choose. And it's important that we keep that as a viable option for people, because we need to be able to have the medical capacity to provide those services anywhere and everywhere it might be necessary, because it could be a life-saving, necessary procedure that needs to be performed, that has nothing to do with a moralistic decision of whether or not somebody decides to keep it. It really literally would save the life of the individual. And if we don't have the capacity to perform those procedures when and where they're needed, then that knowledge is lost to us, and then you're putting in an unnecessary insecurity, an unnecessary potential risk, and an unnecessary deaths will occur because of that. So there's a way to combat, and find a mutual ground in this. Is like, it's perfectly fine for you to want people to make the decisions that you think are best in alignment with your moral beliefs, but you cannot force them to do so ethically, because there is no legal standing by which to suggest that your beliefs are founded off of a concept that it is justifiable. Because again, we have to be able to say there is a point in time where a life is not yet a life. It has to be a viable life that can live outside of the womb on its own without supports before we can determine it as being, a real legitimate life. And if we just take that as a baseline standard and then build out from there, a formalized mutual agreement of this is, the basis, fundamental belief, and then from that we can take, other measures and whatnot to, make sure it reflects the best case in all scenarios. You have to have a fundamental simple, basic, general way to apply the law in a very specific way in certain circumstances. But I think that, banning it altogether is completely unacceptable, and it is a terrible idea because it will lead to lives lost. But, it is perfectly reasonable to say we need to understand and define and delineate what is considered, viable life outside of the womb, and then determine that as, the point by which we make our decisions of whether or not it's, ethically appropriate. But those decisions, even still, we have to leave that out on the table, option open for people, so that we can, again, remember how to do this service, because it is going to be necessary regardless of, the moralistic or even ethical standings of it. It's going to be necessary. We need to still have it on the board and capable. We have to be capable of performing it whenever is necessary. That's just right, reasonable, and fair. And then leave everything else to the, the cultural developments of, us trying to convince one another of, like, what should we agree is probably the best practices in these regards. You're not promoting promiscuity, and you're not promoting, sexual deviance and these sorts of things by allowing people to have the option to, if they so choose, to abort a pregnancy. But that's a choice of a person over their sovereign, autonomous personhood. It's their body autonomy that is wholly their own, and they should be able to make those decisions on their own. And we need to make laws that reflect that, and take those rights for the people. Say sovereign, autonomous personhood, body autonomy, personal dominion. And we establish that in a fourth branch of government in terms of civics, so that in cases like abortion, that is the, basis of our standing in terms of, how much can the government intervene on behalf of the individual? Well, does it violate their personhood and their sovereign, autonomous personhood, their body autonomy and their personal dominion? It does? Well, okay, well then you need to have a reasonable, right, just, and fair legal basis by which you can justify interceding or intervening on behalf of the individual. And so what is that? And that law has to be simple to understand. It's short, sweet, simple, easy to understand. It needs to be executable. It needs to be enforceable. It needs to be, just, right, reasonable, fair, and it needs to be educated to the people. People need to understand about it. And it needs to be able to stand on its own integrity, not be bunched in with other laws and, packaged lump sum. You got to take the good with the bad. Like, no, it needs to be able to stand independently on its own. And then when it's enforced, it has to be able to be in such a way that when a judge goes to make a decision on something, that they don't have to worry about the moral dilemma that, their religion may impose upon themselves in, their moral integrities. It needs to be able to be a simple basis of law that just says, this is dominion, and government doesn't have authority over dominion of the individual. That's for them to decide for themselves. And once we have something like that established, we have now created a safe space for people to start focusing on, how we're going to live together in society without worrying about trying to get people to, do our bidding and our will by hijacking the government and then forcing through laws that are not of our choosing. So there's lots of different laws like that, life choice for, abortion access is one of them. Also, in terms of if you choose to alter your identity or your body in a transgender way, that's a part of your personhood. You should have the right and capacity to be able to do that. And that the government shouldn't be able to intercede in your life and on your behalf in that regard. I do think that there should be an appropriate age that's determined when that is appropriate to happen because of the scientifically understood development of a child through adolescence. Understanding that there are certain steps of development that need to happen in a certain specific order in order to give them the best opportunity to flourish in their life in the future. And so we need to understand, delineate, and define what that, age appropriateness is for certain things. But at the same time, not stigmatize or demonize it or prevent people from maybe not altering themselves, but still choosing to express themselves in that way. That's part of their personhood, But law establishing personal dominion and personhood through a civics branch will help to make sure that we aren't fighting back and forth about these same things that should be just already resolved. Government is not a platform for inflaming culture wars. It's supposed to be there to help us to live together, perform the art of living together, to reduce harm, to mitigate risks, and to make sure that, we are able to, each one of us, remain independent, but still unified under, what I like to deem the concept of a God indivisible, which is just there is a power that's higher than everything, universal order to which we are all come from and go to, and there's no way to separate us from that. It's a very indivisible thing, and the only thing higher than the nation is that indivisible thing. And then the only thing that is below the nation is the individual. Representatives and all those things in between are just part of the nation. So it's, it's God, nation, individual. And understanding that, separation of powers and that order, also recognizing that the nation must submit itself to the individual. And that there is no other higher authority than God and the individual's connection, but the nation itself is to intercede on behalf of the individual because there has to be a higher authority to be able to go to redress our grievances, to be able to help to work out our points of contention and do that conflict resolution sort of thing. And because we can't always turn to a higher power, we need to form institutions and organizations that help us to be able to work out those problems for ourselves. Take a practical, pragmatic approach to it, sort of thing. But we shouldn't be infighting. We certainly shouldn't be having culture wars, played out through government, political theater and such. But unfortunately, it's a lot of what we're seeing with the incoming administration, and it really makes my heart sad. But it, also revs up my my motor in terms of like gearing myself up to make a difference because I see a better way than what they offer. And so if my intentions are to help to bring about the, legitimacy, justification, and applicable constitutional amendment to establish a fourth branch of government in the form of civics, so we can establish that personal dominion, so we really take and for ourselves back our personal power of the individual person, and then use that as a means to be able to make sure we keep a check and balance on the government and how they choose to represent us. And then to help to kind of break down some of those the concentrations of power that then turn into corruptions. And so the civics branch also needs to be able to respond in a way that's other than just, dissenting through suing the government or, protesting, with signs or something, but rather a direct way to redress the government through the civics branch that has the standing authority that if you are a relevant stakeholder, that you can, call out the government on their corrupted bullshit and cause them to self-correct, or be held accountable by external corrective mechanisms that are formalized in the other branches, to hold them to account. And then also to be able to make sure that the people who are relevant stakeholders have a seat at the table, which overall every person in a nation, whether they are a citizen, they are an immigrant, or they're a visitor, is involved with the nation, and so therefore they are a relevant stakeholder. In the global sense, they're relevant stakeholders. But then it goes, shrinks down from the general to the specific in terms of the individual that's being directly impacted in regards to a particular situation or scenario. And that relevant stakeholder needs to have a place at the table to be able to say, well, my voice kind of has more weight in this situation than somebody that's so many degrees far removed from the situation that it doesn't have a direct impact on them. My voice matters in this consideration. It must be taken to account on the merits, and you need to act accordingly, adjust accordingly, create, resolutions and solutions accordingly. Because this is my problem, and the solution lies inside my problem, and I'm here to voice that to you so we can help to work together to find the way in order to dissolve the, point of contention, reduce, mitigate risks, whatever can be done to help to improve the situation, to get back to a sense of like normalcy in alignment with domestic order, which is to say, like, your life should be going about so that you can achieve that, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for yourself, uninhibited and uninfringed. But again, understanding, like, we have to be able to have a mutual understanding, mutual respects, mutual interests, mutual securities, mutual benefits in society. And otherwise, we don't have society. That's what a society is. It's just mutualities. And we need to be able to have a equalizing, platform where we can all come and sit at that table as relevant stakeholders and discuss it, and make sure that we are taking appropriate actions based off of the mutual interests of all parties involved. It's for the best outcomes. And creating a civics branch of government is really about making sure we have that. We have corrective mechanisms for corruption. We have, a unifying, equalizing seat at the table for all people. And then we, dissolve the petty culture war infighting that springs up by making sure people take back their personal power with a personal dominion. And I think that this is a really good starting point to have those three major factors to justify having a amendment to the Constitution. I think that will help us to grow as a people. And it wasn't possible before to have this sort of arrangement because of the fact that we didn't have the connectivity that we have today. But now that we are, an interconnected world and increasingly interconnected, we definitely have the capacity to do that now. And we really need to, reinforce a safe space for that to exist and for it to flourish and for it to be brought to our benefit and mutualities. Also, having a seat at the table in terms of like when laws are being made. So it's not just lobbyists that are putting together packets of like very verbose, legalese type language into, hard to read and understand laws that then get imposed upon people who don't know anything about it and didn't ask for that. So these small, lobbyists from interest groups are making all the decisions for what Congress then puts forth. This dissolves that, capacity for Congress to be influenced in that way, because it's a deep source of corruption. It's literally, in many cases, a direct source of bribery and blackmail and all of these sorts of things. So if having to make sure laws first and foremost go through the citizenry for them to, determine whether it's worth the while and whether they actually consent to be governed in such a way, and then it can be brought, for the legislators to determine, the legal conformed, edge by which we can create alignment with it so that we can hold it to account, make sure it's enforceable, make sure it's easy to understand, all of these things, and then send it back to the people, be like, you agree with this? All right, now that we're all on the same page, right? Now we can pass it through. And then the executive branch can say, okay, we all agree that this is possible. And then you send those to the books of the judicial so that they say, all right, if anything passes in front of your desk that says, this is what it's going to be like in terms of how you interpret the law, make sure this is what's upheld, because this is what we all agree that we want to have happen in terms of, outcome consequences and whether those are positive or negative. So we really need to get ourselves to that place, because I think it's going to solve for a lot of the points of contention in society. But we can't just do that alone and expect ourselves to, be able to fix things. We have to do that, and we have to bring ourselves into, a proper intended use for our government. We need to establish proper government. We need to establish proper capitalism, because I do believe in capitalism. I think it is compatible with good humanity in terms of like social good, and that we should have a proper intended use of our nation's, trajectory to be trying to achieve a certain specific intended goal, to which all things are brought into the full meridian light of and in alignment and attunement with. My belief is that it is the best interest of America for our proper intended use, our purpose, overarching purpose, to become a nation of well-faring stewards. We want everyone to fare well in our society. We want them to fare in terms of how they get along, what their human situation is, what their human condition is. We want that to be in a state of well-being, and to be consistent, and to be upheld, and to be, provided for, and understanding that is the well-being of people is just as much as about providing for, the common defense and promoting the general welfare, all of those things we said that we were going to do for ourselves in our founding documents. So, and then the fact that it brings us on a trajectory to help to solve for things like climate change, because stewardship, welfaring stewardship, means that we need to have a planet that is stewarded. We need to have, a civilization that's steward, the art of living together. Our societies, which is, our cultural identities, and our, organizations and groupings, and our communities, and our neighborhoods, our cities that we live in, and our home spaces, and then the individual themselves, like how we are raising people in terms of like, this is what is good humanity. All those things need to be stewarded, and they can all be stewarded in such a way where it's like very apparent to everyone, like this is what we're going for, this is what we're striving for, everyone, and do so in such a way where nobody gets left behind, and nobody's pitted against a side or another. It's like, it's a through line, so it's consistent for all people to kind of weave into that same fabric of creation and involve themselves and belong however they find it best suited to their tastes and aversions, their interests and their capacities, their skills and their talents, their human ingenuity, and their, impressive capacities for creativity, whatever it might be. And when I think about this, it really is very inspiring to me, because I see this as a way to bring out the best version of all people. And I really hope to be able to do that. And to create for, a living answer to the ultimate question: how do we as a collective create a collective cultural shift of the whole of humanity to align and attune with an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, peaceful, resilient, world paradigm? And I believe that welfaring stewardship is the answer to that. It is the living answer to that. And if we can align our government into a proper government of stewardship, align our capitalism into a proper capitalism of stewardship, and then we give ourselves, the overarching mission objectives to attain that in various ways, give ourselves the appropriate incentives and appropriate, sanctions and the appropriate guidelines and rules and regulations and laws, and permissibilities and authorities and powers and capacities, all of these things. Create those along the same lines of stewardship, and we can really bring about a remarkable world transformation. And I think it'll be one that we could be proud of. I envision out often. I look 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and I follow along this through line of outcome consequences that are positive in terms of following this through line, taking into account any negative consequences that are in potential, so I can hopefully innovate those out, as many as I can variably account for. And I look out and deep into the future, and I see, as the indigenous people would say, the 7th generation, and how that will affect and outcome consequences. And I see us being, as a species, as individuals, just really profoundly proud of ourselves, proud of our heritage, proud of our ancestors, and grateful for all that they have done and all of the everybody continued to do, and what we're going to continue to do, generations in the future. And it provides a beautiful promise to our children, which are the living messages we send to a time we will not see, which is a beautiful, wonderful quote by Neil Postman, that I always keep in the back of my mind in terms of how I orient my decision making. It has to be agreeable with that quote, because to me that really just represents one of the most important, genuine values of why we do what we do. And if we can't align what we do with that, and let that be part of how we accomplish things, then we're doing it wrong. And to me, it is so much easier to see the potential in that, and to naturally be called to service in alignment with that. I have a natural attraction and affinity for stewardship and welfaring stewardship. I always have, and I did hope that it would have a different approach in terms of a concept that I had once thought would be able to bring more people together, but I unfortunately see the trajectory of that particular approach to human future as having a lot of really negative outcome consequences, mostly to do with in terms of the intentions of the propagators of such a future, are not aligned with the best interests of humanity, good humanity. And so I worked really hard to try to reconcile that and see if there was a way to overcome that human fault and human failing, and that human error and that human mistake, so that it could be overcome, maybe not immediately, but over time, or mitigated along the way, so that it would reduce the negative outcome consequences, so that we could benefit in the great ways that would be along that line. But I realize that it's if you plant a poison and toxic seed in a garden, you cannot change a seed from what it is. It is what it is. And if it is, all of the stuff that it's made of is, poisonous, you're not going to be able to get, a fruitful plant from that produces, edible fruit, if it is from its initial conditions toxic and meant to be a toxic, plant. So you can't change the stripes of that. You can't change the substance of that seed. So the negative outcome consequences are inevitabilities. It's a continuum, along a continuum of negative outcome consequences that are inevitable, they're unavoidable, and they're going to come in varying degrees and affect people in different ways. And if you have people that are working on that have no sense of integrity in terms of like outcome consequences that affect other people that are not themselves, actually conscious consideration for your fellow human being, then what ends up playing out in that regard is a lot of unnecessary human suffering and struggling that could be avoided simply by not planting that seed. So removing that and planting a seed of, the appropriate intentions, the appropriate angles and approach, and the appropriate degrees of separation in there to achieve, this continuum of positive outcome consequences, and intentionally build out for that, it gives the best chances for success of a future that would be beneficial, mutually beneficial to all parties involved. And so that's where my attention and intention has always been, is to create that, a cosmic seed of potential, and for it to not be tainted by, those things to which themselves cannot withstand the test of time. It can be shaken. And so we need to remove all of that and just come back down to the principal integrities. And that's really where my work is focused on. And I do see through the accomplishment of this that we can achieve a similar to, fantastic future in a way that is integrity bound and is, sprung from the wellspring of wonderful opportunities that we will afford ourselves in, continuity and consistency, and along the continuum of positive outcome consequences from this intention set. And so it took a long time to really confirm that was the trajectory, and making sure that seed is whole and pure, the pure essence of potential before it's planted, sort of thing. So now being out there, because you can't account for everything all of the time, but then understanding there's enough kind of like enough potentials of redemption and recovery that I've created an opportunity along the way as well. It's kind of like, like stopping points, resting points, or checkpoints. Let's think of it in terms of like playing a video game. You have a checkpoint, and once you get to that point, you're good. You're not going to fall back from that point. And once you get there, you can reassert yourself, readjust for the needs of now, and then continue on your journey, knowing you reached at least that checkpoint, and you've saved your game up to that point, and so you're not going to lose all the effort that you put into at that point, and establishing a lot of those checkpoints along the way, sort of thing, so that when there is the unforeseeable future, because we can only predict potential outcomes in a scenario universe, understanding that not all things can be accounted for. You just do the best you can. When those unforeseen events and consequences end up springing up, we're fortified and resilient, so that even if we do kind of like fall back a little, we have those save points that we've created for ourselves, so that we don't lose it all, sort of thing. And you have to build out intentionally in that way, no matter what you're building. It's kind of like the same thing as building a house. It's like you have to do it step by step. First you have to do this, then you have to do that, sort of thing, before you can, put it all together. But along the way, you build out the basic frame. That's set. You don't have to worry about, like, you get the foundation down, that's done. Check. it's accounted for. You don't have to go back if you did it right, and then you don't have to worry about going back and redoing that foundation later. And then you move on to the next step and you build up from there. Build up the framing, and you move beyond that and you go into the next step and you put in your windows and your doors and you put on your roof and you put on your shingles, and then you do your drywall on the inside. You do all these things and you do them in certain specific orders and in intentional ways. But once you've accomplished one part, you're done with that. You don't have to go back to it. You might have to maintain and consistently over time, account for it as you're building, onto that system, account the integrities of it, like how much weight can this bear, and these sorts of things. And, what's the malleability, adaptability of certain materials, whatever. You have to understand those sorts of things, in the sense of whatever it is you're working on, if you're building something out. So understanding all those variables, and you're building out for it with intention, and you're setting these checkpoints of achievement along the way. And then, so if something happens like, oops, I forgot to do that, you can take it apart to that point, restart again, without losing all your work from before that sort of thing. And thinking of it in terms of that, and really setting intention for looking as far out in the futures in terms of, outcomes that will be achieved, positive outcome consequences. There's so much potential along the lines of intentionally building for a well-faring stewardship future. And so hopefully to be able to inspire people to want to be able to involve themselves with that, and to be the beautiful, antithesis to the, MAGA administration and what they think that they're making of America, making it into in their image. Because I don't think that reflects the genuine, authentic, integrity-bound, honorable, just, right, reasonable, and fair, original spirit of intent, founding fathers, proper intended use that they had, intended and envisioned and built out for and set out for and fought and defended for us to become. I do think that in many ways our founding fathers can come back from the past into the future and see us here, that they would be so very disappointed. They would be amazed for many of the things that we've managed to do, but at the same time it's like you really lost sight about what matters. So wanting to help to redeem the time somehow, and to make them proud, and to make future generations proud of us for all that we do here. That's why I do the work that I do. And I'm genuinely hopeful that the work that I do will be a great success, despite what is being intentionally done by the Trump administration that's coming in. I do think that we are in a state of, many disasters and crises and many world conflicts, and we are on the brink of war, and now we have Trump talking about taking an imperialistic, aggressive conquering of land in order to shore up certain concentrations of power that he thinks are going to be to the benefit of America, despite the fact that it would be to the disadvantage of other people. and actually, in fact, ennobilizing and justifying aggressive invasion of sovereign autonomous nations, which is the predication of, the war in Gaza and in the war in Ukraine. And the fact that he would even justify the language and the, rhetoric that would promote such an approach to America's, efforts to, build out for the future. It really is quite disappointing, and it doesn't represent what I think is the free world. I think it is a very limiting world in terms of its isolationism, and it is also, conquering people and exploiting weaknesses and these sorts of things. And there's not a lot of respect that I have to be able to extend for institutions that allow for those sorts of things to happen. And so given that Trump will have the trifecta of basically, power and influence over all three of the branches of government, judicial, legislative, and an executive, that he would get them to fall in line with approvals of such a tactic, and give him justifications and give him authorities to do that, is really going to disintegrate the integrity of our institutions of government. And the consequences for that are going to be pretty severe. I really do believe, in the most truest and honest sense, that he is trying to set us up for domestic decay, to the point where we go into turn into a failed state, and then have a internal conflict that forces America to be replaced. And I'm not okay with that outcome consequence. But again, all I can do is just build out for a better future, and seek to find those who are interested in building out that future as well, and to gain as much momentum and game-changing influence and outcomes in those directions, so that we can make a better future that makes that one obsolete. I will say I really do wish that President Joe Biden would have better served his legacy and better served America by taking seriously the threats of the MAGA cohort and the Trumpianism that was rising in America, and to have taken an approach, in all seriousness, a way to find a respectful, mutual interest resolution to the conflict of interest between them, producing an outcome for the future that is a direct threat to America itself. But I'm grateful for what he did do to step up, to help America to avoid a lot of really terrible outcome consequences had Trump had 2 consecutive terms. I will always have gratitude for the fact that I really do believe he saved a lot of lives by doing that. Um, and I really do hope that America can find it in their hearts and their minds and their capacity to no longer accept the binary choice of lesser evils of the Democratic and Republican parties, and to find the necessity and the capacity to vote in a third party or non-party candidate, individual that could restore integrities, resurrect the American identity, and set us on a trajectory of a better outcome. And I do believe myself as being a person that has the potential to be the leader of a truly free world, and restore America to being a leader of the free world, and to lead America into its pinnacle of potential that is good outcomes for the best interest of all people involved. I know that there is a there's a lot to come that I'm not going to be able to prevent from happening, and it's going to really hurt my heart and stir up my righteous anger and make me weep for the human suffering. But I refuse to be anything but strong and determined and set on making sure that I do all that I can to give the best opportunity for us to endure and endear ourselves to a better future. So with that, present state of the world, not so great. The other things happening in terms of, conflicts everywhere. I understand why people they have to align with Trump, because he's really just given them no other options. But I pray for the best possible outcome despite that fact. Knowing that there would have been a much better outcome if they weren't basically left with no other options but to align with Trump. It's a very tragic place to be in, position to be put in. But I respect that, you got to play the cards that you're dealt and play them well. So I wish them all of the best, and I will continue to include them in all of my considerations as to how I might be able to help redeem the time for them to restore integrities and to heal, help them to heal. I know that there's the saying that Martin Luther King Jr. said, doggerel sum up of light will always overcome the dark. And it's never the other way around. As long as we have even a spark of light and spark of hope, there's potential to build on. That's not exactly what he said, but that's, how it makes sense in my head is like, not all is lost. There's potential to overcome the darkness and not let it be the other way around. And I just continue to reinforce that simple truth and build on that, because that has integrity. Simple truths are integrity bound. And if we're weaving the fabric of creation using those simple points, then we know that what builds out from there will endure. So I stay motivated to continuously keep those points in alignment with all that I do. And stay focused on, again, re-emphasizing. I've done this plenty of times in other videos, but re-emphasizing again, I am not a religious person in any sense of the word. I just believe in a God indivisible, a universal, potent, unchanging, unwavering certitude by which I can place all trust in with confidence, and knowing that for a fact, and then understanding how that is a simple truth that's in everything, a potential that's in everything. And so when I pray, it's more just like I'm praying to the divine alignment within myself that connects to that divine matrix and recognizes those simple truths, taps into them, builds off of them, integrates in with them, weaves the fabric of creation with them, aligns and attunes with them, and stays true to them, because every time I do that, it is the truth, the light, and the way. So when I say I pray, it's to that universal, all-knowing, all-encompassing, indivisible, and really believing that all I'm really doing is bringing attention to that, so that it is called upon like a force that can't be named, but can be evoked through prayer. So, and then believing with faith that everything will work out in the end. It always does. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. So with that, I'm really grateful for your time, which is extremely valuable, your attention, which is very much appreciated, and your thoughtful consideration, which is inspiring. And I hope to be able to meet you at another time and place to discuss other enlightening concepts, as I feel compelled that I must share. And as I continue to share along the trajectory of, bringing my work out into the full meridian light, and start building out for it, like, I invite you to join in, help make the world a good place. With that, again, till next time, be well.